Hi everybody, it's Steph from the Stellium Astrology podcast. I'm your host. I'm the founder of stelliumastrology.com. I used to write horoscopes for Elle Magazine UK, and I am an occasional tutor at the London School of Astrology. And today I thought I would just jump on quickly. It just was a subject that was just floating around in my head. Just basically because Mercury is retrograde either in his shadow or actually retrograde by the time I publish this. I think he's going to be retrograde by the time I publish. And I just wanted to talk about something called the shadow periods, because obviously, we hear about these kind of buzzwords. Obviously, Mercury retrograde has become a buzzword that people are very familiar with. Now, I don't have a great deal of time to record this episode. I actually have to nip out, but I really wanted to get something down. I just felt like it would be useful for us to just explore, just dip in, basically very light dipping of the toes into the Mercury retrograde subject. I'm just looking in my ephemeris, and yes, basically what I wanted to do was just talk about what is the shadow period. So it seems to come down to two things, and it's not exclusive to Mercury retrograde. It can be to do with any retrograde planet, really. I'd say more to do with the personal planets than the social or the transpersonal planets. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, there are actually shows that I've recorded on the different categories of the planets. If you want to go back to the earlier episodes, which I know are starting to get knocked off from Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So you might have to go to the actual podcast website, which is the stelliumastrologypodcast.com, or you can look back over YouTube. I will put things into categories, nice tidy little categories at some point, hopefully soon. But yes, so I will provide links for anything that I mention anyway. But anyway, so with the slower moving planets, so the planets that actually don't cover as much ground, like Uranus, Neptune and Pluto, the transpersonal planets, it's not really worth thinking about shadow. You can think about shadow and post shadow or whatever. With Saturn and Jupiter and Saturn, they do, when they retrograde, they do cover a bit more ground than the the outer planets, the transpersonals. So you could look at those shadow periods too, though my personal feeling is it's may not bear as much fruit as if you were hoping to find something juicy, which is often connected to the personal planets. So things like Mercury, Venus and Mars, when they're retrograde or direct, they travel quite far in quite a short space of time. Mercury and Venus both tend to transit approximately a degree a day, and Mars is about a degree every couple of days. Not exactly, not precisely, but thereabout. So when they are direct, they are gaining, they cover a lot of ground, and then when they turn retrograde, they can go back and cover a lot of ground as well. And then when they go direct, they cover their ground again. So the understanding, there seems to be two schools of thought about what Mercury retrograde is. For some people, and I don't think that there's a right or a wrong. I think there's an actual, it seems to be quite poignant that both explanations hold some, well, they're meaningful. They're both meaningful. So for myself personally, I'd always been of the opinion that Mercury retrograde shadow and pre-shadow is essentially where you have Mercury passing the degree in his forward motion, or any planet in their forward motion, passing the degree that they will eventually retrograde back to. That being that they've entered their shadow period, because it's the shadow of where they're going to go back to. And then when they are direct again and they are moving forward again, once the retrograde is over, they are in the post shadow until they reach the degree that they went retrograde at. I don't know if I said that in a very clear way. With Mercury retrograde, for example, Mercury retrograde in September 2022, which is the Mercury retrograde we have either very fast approaching or are currently under the influence of, depending on the date of this podcast coming out. we have Mercury turning retrograde or entering retrograde motion at 8 degrees and 55 minutes of Libra. Now, what we can do is when we go in the ephemeris, or if you've got software like AstroGold, or if you're using astro.com, you can go back. It's probably easier to either use an ephemeris or use something like AstroGold, which is actually designed for you to easily flip forwards and backwards when you're calculating charts. There's plenty of other software, by the way. That's just the one that I use. There's like time passages and a couple more. But anyway, so we're looking for when Mercury will pass 8 degrees and 55 minutes of Libra again. But before we do, let's have a look at where he ends up. So he goes back, when he's retrograde, he actually retrogrades back into Virgo, and he goes back to 24 degrees and Virgo. So essentially what we want to do is we want to find when he passed 24 degrees and 21 minutes. So let's have a look. Virgo, Virgo, Virgo. So 24 approximately. This happened on the 21st of August. Mercury entered pre-shadow because he went past 24 degrees and 21 minutes of Virgo. And then from that date onwards, he was in a type of shadow, pre-shadow, where he then entered retrograde motion at 8 degrees and 55 minutes of Libra on the 10th of September. Now, when he comes out of his shadow period, when he comes out of retrograde motion, so on the 1st of October, when he's at 24 minutes and 21 degrees, 24 degrees and 21 minutes of Virgo, he then enters forward motion, direct motion, and he reaches 8 degrees and 55 minutes of Libra on the 17th of October. So the actual entire Mercury retrograde transit, including pre and post shadow, starts on the 21st of August, and it actually finishes on the 17th of October. So that's quite a massive chunk of time, actually, if you're taking into consideration the pre and the post shadow as well. And what's poignant about that, in my opinion, is that you experience connected events. So for one example, a Venus retrograde, when was this? I think Venus retrograde, where was it? Maybe in Leo. I'm trying to think now. It may have been back in 2016. Did we have a Venus retrograde then? Venus retrograde. It may have been 2015. Oh, there was a Mars retrograde then. Yeah, I feel like it might have been, it was in 2015. So there was a Venus retrograde from late July in 2015 up until September 2015, and that's not including the pre or post shadow. When Venus went into the pre-shadow, I remember being at an event with a couple of friends of mine, and they were in a band together, and everything had been kind of hunky-dory with them up until this point. But something happened. One of them had a bit of a drink problem, and when they got on stage, if they were drunk, they would just be really abusive towards the crowd. And one of them was very professional. The other one was quite unprofessional in that sense. One of them was quite serious about wanting to, do a good job with the band and everything. And the other one was a little bit more rock and roll, self-destructive, extremely self-destructive. So what happened was they were on stage that night, and the destructive one decided to be abusive and rude to the crowd, to the point that it really, really agitated the other guy. And the other guy came up to me and just went, you know what, I don't see how this is going to continue, this working relationship, Venus retrograde relationship. And so I thought that's interesting, and kind of saw that the relationship was deteriorating in a very subtle way from that point forward. Then Venus went retrograde at 0 Virgo, and then went retrograde through Leo and went right back to mid Leo, to back to 14 Leo, and that was in September 2015. And that was when the relationship really started to fall apart. It was very much like, instead of being subtle, it really, it became irreconcilable, basically. They both had a Mars square natally as well, and I have kind of brought them up previously on the podcast. And then the post shadow was kind of the fallout and the bringing back together of the individuality, like the individuals, like they kind of like went their separate ways, and they kind of like trying to understand what went wrong with the relationship. But they didn't, obviously. The relationship was over, the working relationship, but the creative relationship, as you'd imagine, in Leo, Venus retrograde in Leo. But yes, it was very, to me, looking back over it, I could see these points in the pre-shadow, the retrograde period, and the post-shadow where things just really became an issue and how it unfolded. I can't be really precise because it was a long time ago, and I am just, as I've mentioned, just sort of doing an off-the-cuff episode right now. But that I found interesting. You know, I really do think you can do this with Mars, Venus, and Mercury. So I think it's really interesting when you know that any of these planets are going to go retrograde. So as we know, we've got Mercury retrograde, but also later this year we have Mars going retrograde in Gemini. So Mars turns retrograde at 25:36 Gemini, and he turns direct at 8 degrees and 9 minutes of 8 degrees and 8 minutes of Gemini in January 2023. What a long drawn out affair. What a long drawn out affair that's going to be. But basically, so we'll look for when Mars passed 8 degrees of Gemini, which will have been on the 4th of September. Yes, on the 4th of September. So really around this time. So make a note and think about what you did that day, any kind of realizations, particularly if you've got anything that's in any of the air signs or any of the mutable signs, so that you're going to be experiencing either a square or a trine to this transit. Think about, or not just square or trine, but maybe even conjunction or opposition, depending on your position. But essentially what I want you to do is make a note of any kind of realizations you may have had that day, any kind of choices, any thoughts about like direction, where you want to be heading, any decisions you have to make, that kind of thing. Courses you might be thinking of studying, you know, that kind of thing. And as she says this, she realizes she's advising herself against something. Always the way when a Gemini ascendant is talking, they're resolving confusion in their own mind. But anyway, so yes, think about that around the 4th of September. What's going on for you? What were you thinking? Was there was there something going on that essentially it seemed maybe not super poignant, but was enough to kind of trigger your thought process? And then we are going to look at where we are, 25:36 of Gemini. So now in the post shadow, we're going to go to find 25:36, which is at 25:36 on the 16th of March 2023. So that's like a huge pre and post shadow period, and that's when Mars will leave the post shadow. So it could well be that for example, what I'm thinking myself here is I'm interested in studying, and just so you know, it's Mars retrograde is going to be crossing my ascendant. It's going to be opposing my Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Sagittarius, and it's going to be trine my natal Mars placement, and going back over by trine, trining my midheaven. I think going back as far as, not quite as far back as my Venus or my Mercury placement. So essentially it's like going to be trining my natal Mars. So it's about thinking about really where I want to be focusing my energy and my efforts. With Jupiter Uranus, it could be firing up the astrological essence of my nature, just on a really basic level. And what I've been thinking of is studying the next level of counselling skills, because I really want to do that. I feel almost like really, really desperate to do it quickly, and I've been offered a place very, very soon. Actually, the place would be on the Monday the 5th of September, when Mars goes into its pre-shadow the day before. So what I'm thinking is, slow down. There's no need to be so spontaneous, as it's literally opposing my Uranus, my natal Uranus and Jupiter, that kind of cowboy energy. And yeah, so I'm thinking about studying this next level, but I'm like, but I might get overwhelmed. I might be taking on too much. But think about it, it's trying my natal Mars. So is it something that's really going to give me a sense of direction? Is it going to be firing me up to do what I really want to do? Is it going to be adding to my arsenal of eclectic skills? Or is it going to be draining me? Because remember, Mars is going retrograde and we're changing direction about our thought process here. Not necessarily thought process, but definitely about our focus, our attention, our energy, our drive, where we want to be, where we want to be going, our vitality. When Mars is retrograde, it's definitely, as far as the retrograde period is concerned, it's closer to Earth, but it is because it's really long-winded to explain, so I'm not going to bother going into it, but it's actually closer to Earth. So if you think about the flame, the heat element of Mars, it's almost as though when it's closer, the heat is stronger, so the sense of desire can be stronger, but also the the need to make changes and do things differently based on your change of focus can also be quite overwhelming and de-energizing, essentially. So I am very mindful now that I've done this little, it's so funny that I felt prompted to do this. I think it's been a very useful exercise for me, but that's just one way of looking at it. And the course that I'm thinking of doing, I've either got one that starts literally next week on Monday, which is a last minute slot, somebody's dropped out, or I can wait until next March when I think it'll be a bit more manageable. And that's interesting that the Mars will leave his shadow period. When did I say it was? On March the 17th, 16th or 17th, did I say something like that? Which is really interesting. I wish now, let me just have a very quick look. I know I've got to go very soon. Let me just have a wee butchers, because I know I emailed somebody. There we are, that's it, and I put the dates in. So the next course starts on the 17th or 18th of March next year. So the 17th of March, so it starts on the 17th, 25:59. So literally this Mars retrograde is about me either jumping in feet first and focusing on the counselling skills training, or biding my time a little bit, not being as spontaneous as I really feel like I want to be, and rejoining the course later down the line, by which point I may have discovered it's not actually the direction I want to go in anyway. Just a little tidbit from me. Anyway, so the other alternative idea about what the retrograde shadow or post-shadow period is actually about planetary speed. So when the planets turn retrograde, they begin to slow down. They actually lose their momentum in a sense, like they never actually physically slow down or actually change direction. It's all an optical illusion from our perspective on Earth. However, it's an interesting observation that when we see from our perspective that the planets seem to slow down and then grind to a halt and then move backwards, we feel the presence of that reversal in a very physical way on this planet. One person wrote that let's have a look. Where is it? The speed of the movement, they're saying. I like the idea that it's based on speed. I've always felt that moment in the station direct where the speed is 0. It's one of the most retrograde points in the whole time span. So yes, it could be anything like, things grinding to a halt, all the mercurial things, for example, in a Mercury retrograde, just stop working. Like you might be working on a computer or writing a letter or something, and things just, you know, the process is almost ground to a halt, impossible. Maybe if you're traveling, maybe the train decided something happens that prevents your journey from completing in some way or another. So you know, it's these kind of things become quite obvious. And the planetary speed, depending on where you're looking, I think you can look at software like I've shown you before. Let me just have a quick look. Still learning it, guys. I'm still learning it. Right, so let me pull the screen up very quickly. Share the screen. Let's go in. So in some software, like, let's have a look here. We've got Mercury up here. Oh, and it tells you it's direct, but it's slow. I think that, you know, there's ways of telling the planetary speed. I think in some ephemerides, you can tell the planetary speed. With some apps, you can tell the planetary speed. I think in the Honeycomb Collective Diary, you can also tell the speed of the planet as well. So it's interesting. I think it takes, usually when you watch it in the, on here as well, let me see if I can just go, you can see how fast or slow it's getting by pressing forwards. You can see that it actually, I think more so with Mars retrograde, it might be interesting. So let's go ahead to, when does Mars go retrograde? At the end of October. Is it the end of October? End of, yeah, end of October. So let's have a look at Mars. Mars slowing down. We already know that Mars spends approximately a degree every 2 days, but if we watch, I don't know how I can make this actually spin more slowly. You can see Mars ticking along there, and then it seems to spend a bit longer at 25. And then, yeah, so it depends on the planet and how fast they move, but some of them are going to be slower than others naturally. So you'll find that they don't, you know, they might spend a week or two slowing down and grinding to a halt and then speeding back up again. If I find anything interesting that I can share with you on planetary speed and how planetary speed is calculated, maybe I can touch on it in another show. But this was just to clear up any kind of confusion about what pre-shadow meant or post-shadow. It's literally, some schools of thought are that it is when the planet reaches the degree that it turned retrograde or is going to retrograde back to, that's pre and post. Or the moment that the planet starts slowing down in preparation for retrograde motion. I think both of them are poignant. I think the more original school of thought was the planetary speed, but my own personal research has led me down an avenue where the actual degrees hold some sense of meaning as well. I find that that is the case in all areas of astrology. The degrees are very important. But I hope you found it interesting and useful. If you're enjoying the podcast, please either rate or review me, or do both if you can, if you happen to be listening on Apple Podcasts or any podcasting platform. If you'd like to be entered into a draw for a Magic of Eye astrological almanac, you are more than welcome to do so. All you have to do is subscribe to me on YouTube. Take a screenshot and send an email to Stephanie, Stefanie, at stelliumastrology.com. That's purely so I do actually receive your entry, because some people have private YouTube channels, so that just makes it simpler. And as far as I'm aware, that's everything I had to cover with you today. So thanks very much for tuning in, and I will speak to you next time. Take care, guys. Bye.